Okay, thank you, Sue. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good late night, depending upon where you are around the world. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for voting to have this be presented. Neil and I are delighted to share our perspective on what we see as a real key industry opportunity, which summarizes how do we deliver better reports. And as we get into this and sort of anticipating one of the questions, we define better as meaning the client understands the solution to the marketing problem they paid us to address. So we're thinking about the solution here and how do we better bring clients along to solutions. So 3 points that we'll talk about today. First is clients aren't happy. It's not new, but it's still a problem. Second is it's a problem because reporting is too long and not solution focused, and we'll have some examples on that. And then third, we'll give you an approach that we believe is proven to deliver on better reporting. So with that, let me turn it over to Neil.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Sue, and thanks everyone for joining in. I have the pleasure of outlining the problem here. If I look when Mike and I first met, which was when we were working at Synovate, this is actually the problem that brought us together and first got us working together to try and raise the bar with the work that we were doing there. And what prompted that really was the fact that a lot of senior managers in businesses really don't value market research as a source of information. And that's very clear from a survey that the Advertising Research Foundation carried out a little while ago, where they specifically asked CEOs the usefulness of different kinds of information in their business. Now, as you can see, finance and accounting and marketing were rated as very useful. So CEOs saw those as providing really valuable input into their business decision making. Information services and human resources, a little bit less so. And sadly for all of us here today, market research really came bottom of the table. It was really not seen as providing value to the business by the CEOs who were questioned by the ARF. And I think that's because market research too often doesn't provide clear insights and solutions into business problems. As the great philosopher Jerry Maguire was fond of saying, show me the money. I think market research is too often guilty of not showing clients where the money is. And one of the stimulus for Mike actually in his role in Synovate trying to improve standards was some comments made by Marjolaine from Philips Electronics, and excuse me if I don't try and pronounce her surname. She was asked in an interview in Research World back in 2005 whether she was happy with the quality of reporting in market research, and she gave an extremely blunt answer: no. Now, I don't think Marjolaine is alone in her view on this quality, and I'm sure many, if not all of you, have the experience of clients spontaneously providing quite negative comments and feedback on the quality of reporting in a lot of market research. Now, sadly, although that was back in 2005, things don't seem to have improved at all in the intervening years. And in reading the ESMR Global Report this year, which I think came out 1 or 2 months ago, there were several very similar quotations from clients, and I picked out one in particular which I think really homes in on one of the key issues in market research reporting. It comes from Tom Wilms, who works within the SAB Miller Group, and he says, quote, "We don't want suppliers coming in and telling a story in 120 slides, but it still happens. We need to go from what to so what." So I think the nub of the problem is that too often reporting is too long and it doesn't focus enough on providing business solutions. So let's go through 3 bad but unfortunately all too common examples of these kinds of reports. The first example is the War and Peace report. The War and Peace report, like all 3 examples I'm going to show you, is a real example that Mike and myself have seen. The War and Peace report came to me as a 700-page document. And when I asked for an executive summary to try and help me understand the report, I was sent back a slightly slimmed down 300 pages. Now, to me, and to Mike, as he'll talk about, an executive summary is 1 page. It's certainly not 300 pages, not even a full report should be that long. A second example is the data drop report. This is an example which actually seems to be becoming a little bit more common now in the age of automated charting. One example that comes to mind is a tracking report that was reviewed because the business had actually been lost, and we wanted to understand why. Now, the final report that had been submitted to the client for that business was a 205-page document with 4 charts per page and no discernible storyline. So it was pretty clear why the business had been lost. The final example is the Agatha Christie report. That's the report that's shrouded in mystery and London thick fog until you reach the final page. And if you're lucky, the answer might be revealed. Now, in business reporting, this is really not a good idea. You should always be quite upfront about what you're going to tell the client. For 2 very good reasons. Firstly, because that's what clients want and ask for. And secondly, having a mysterious kind of build-up to your final answer might often leave you stranded when the client reaches a different conclusion. So to summarize, let's go back to Marjolaine. And I think her words are still very relevant today, which is that many of us in market research are still uncomfortable with providing clear and concise recommendations. So with that, let me hand over to Mike to talk about how we can be more clear and more concise.
Thanks, Neil. So how do we create solution-oriented, concise reports? 4 things. First, we start with an elevator speech, and I'll define that in a second, which then leads into a 1-page executive summary, not 300 pages, which then leads into a 15 to 25-page document, not 700 pages. And for those who like having lots of weight and get paid by the page, you have a big, thick appendix. So what does this mean? So we start with the elevator speech, and the elevator speech says, in 30 seconds, I tell you what issue I'm addressing, my current answer or hypothesis, and my next steps. It's an elevator speech because there's no text, there's no charts. You're in the elevator, the door opens, your client walks in. You've got 30 seconds. Hopefully you're in a building tall enough for 30 seconds. Sometimes you get 15. And by the time you get to the ground floor and the door opens, the client's going to walk out. So you've got very few seconds to get them a very clear, quick, top-line answer. This is not something I came up with. This is something you're taught day 1 at McKinsey, where I was before, that if you meet a client, you always have your elevator speech in your mind. It helps focus on what you're being paid to do. And a good elevator speech that encourages the client to say, tell me more, but you give them the answer up front. So my favorite example of an elevator speech came from a researcher who was in Korea then, now he's in Eastern Europe. And he had worked on a new product test report. There was 80 or 90 pages in the report. They had 2 hours booked with the client. And the client stuck his head in and said, this is the most important thing I'm working on this quarter. I'm very interested in understanding this. I don't have time, unfortunately, to sit through the 2 hours. I've been called into something else. And he looked at the researcher and said, so should I launch? The researcher said, launch. A one-word elevator speech. The client then turned around and walked out of the room. Now, the client came back 5 minutes later. He said, I do want to hear more of the details, but I wanted to make sure you and I are on the same page. I have a decision to make, and I needed to hear your answer to that decision. And that's what a good elevator speech does. Now, how do you get to a good elevator speech and also the executive summary which flows from it? 2 things I'll raise today. One is synthesis and not summary. What I mean by that is not just reporting the facts. So here's an example, 3 facts about your knee, your car window, and getting a speeding ticket. And a synthesis is just rewording this, right? My knee, car, and wallet were all recently damaged. That just restates the fact. That's not synthesizing it. The synthesis is, right, I've been places I shouldn't be. It tells me what it means. Or, to the quote earlier, gives me the so what. One of my favorite other examples of good synthesis is an example from Nora Ephron in the book Made to Stick. And by the way, I highly recommend that book by Chip and Dan Heath. And I have the example where people are being taught how to write a newspaper headline, because that's what an elevator speech is. It's your headline. And they're told that the audience is, it's a high school newspaper, the audience is the high school students. The school has won a prestigious award. The principal will be going to the state capitol the next day to accept the award. It's so prestigious, teachers will be accompanying the principal. And they're told to write the headline. And people write summary headlines. School wins award, principal to accept award, those sort of things. The actual headline, if you think about it, which is what's relevant to the audience, is very different. And what the story says is the real headline is no school tomorrow. Right? Because the principal and the teachers are all going to the state capitol. And that's saying what something means as opposed to just reporting the facts. So first we want to synthesize and not summarize. The second thing we want to do in thinking about our elevator speech and our executive summary is focus on outputs, not inputs. So Ted Levitt from Harvard teaches us that people don't want to buy a 1/4-inch drill. They want a 1/4-inch hole. They're not worried about the inputs, they're worried about the outputs. And this is a real issue in our industry because we love to talk about the technique. We love to talk about the tool. Even after we've done the research and the client has already hired us based on our tools and techniques, we still want to tell them how wonderful our tools and techniques are. We want to talk about the drill. The client wants to hear about the 1/4-inch hole. And that's what the gentleman from Gross was saying in the quote that Neil used earlier. You know, we need to move from what to so what, and even better, perhaps, now what. Right? Tell me what it means, synthesize it, and tell me about the output. So the elevator speech is the 30-second summary. The executive summary is the next level of that. It is 1 page. If you really force it, it's 2 pages, but probably you've gone too long. It's not 300 pages. It starts with the elevator speech because the elevator speech is your top-line answer. And what it adds is the 2 to 5 reasons why that conclusion is the right one. So there's a direct flow from your elevator speech into your executive summary. By the way, you don't get to the executive summary without a good elevator speech. In working at Synovate, people would come in and they'd bring their 70 or 200-page document and ask for help. And I would turn it upside down and I'd say, give me your elevator speech. And if they couldn't do an elevator speech, I said, I don't need to go through the rest of the document. You need to go back and work on your elevator speech. And then when they came back with a good elevator speech, we'd look at the executive summary. And if you've written a good 1-page executive summary, then the rest of the document will flow from that. If you don't have a good summary, it's not worth looking at the rest of the document. So we go from the elevator speech to the executive summary. Now, what does the rest of the document look like? What is this concise 15 to 25-page report? So it starts with your executive summary, which, by the way, is page 1 or page 2, depending upon how you number your cover page. So the background comes after it. The first thing you talk about is, here's my answer to your marketing issue. Then if there are 3 points in the executive summary, generally a text, but doesn't have to be text, that summarizes the first point. And then you've got your 3 charts, which then bring to life the support for why point A is correct. Then we have point B. Then we have 3 charts supporting that. Then we have point C. And we have 3 charts supporting that. This tells the story. Now maybe it's 2 charts, maybe it's 5 charts. It doesn't have to be 3. It's not 20 charts. If there's 20 charts, it's too many. Now, one of the problems you get to is you came up with this great other finding that has nothing to do with the problem the client hired you to solve, but you absolutely have to tell them. And the mistake people make is trying to jam that into the report, and it ruins the flow up above in points A, B, and C. So there's a section called Other Findings and 1 or 2 or 3 charts, which generally is code to the client of, this is stuff you can skip over because it doesn't actually answer your question, but I had to put it in my report. And then we have our next steps and the appendix. Now the next steps should be similar to the executive summary. It might be identical. So Dale Carnegie, a business communicator, said, tell them what you're going to tell them. That's the executive summary. Tell it to them. That's your points A, B, and C in the charts. And tell them what you told them. That's the next steps. What you might, as appropriate, add to the next steps, though, is, given this conclusion, what are the actions we take? So there might be additional information which is relevant at that point, but the next step should start by going back to the executive summary and making it clear what the storyline is. Now, again, this is not something that I've created. This is called the Pyramid Principle. There's a great book by Barbara Minto under the name Pyramid Principle. It's in about 30 languages. I highly recommend it if you want to go into more depth about how to structure reports like this. So since we wanted less to be more, we have very few charts. And we said clients aren't happy. The reports they're getting are too long and not solution focused. We suggest a solution-oriented, concise report. Now, as Pogo said, Pogo was sort of the Doonesbury of the 1950s and 60s. I have met the enemy, and he is us. So this is something that we as an industry, both clients and suppliers, need to address. We may get questions about what do you do when your client doesn't get this. And there are some researchers out there who need to see this presentation because they like getting the War and Peace report or the data drop report. In most cases, in fact, I don't have a single case where I've ever done with a CMO or a senior executive where they've had that preference. So the junior person may, because they haven't been exposed to what their internal client wants. So it's proven, clients want it, they're happier when they get it, but it's also not easy to do. And we can't cover in 20 minutes how you go about doing this other than to show you the structure, but to say that in doing this, it takes time. It's like riding a bicycle. Once you learn how to ride a bicycle, it feels natural and you don't remember how hard it was to get on. But you got to get on a few times and you're going to fall off. But you need to get on and keep getting on until you get your balance. With that, let me turn it back over to Neil.
Well, I think now it's over to questions and answers. Thanks, Mike.